Hello and welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast presented by Fantrax. My name is Crawford. Today is Sunday, March 10th. Happy daylight savings times to everyone. Hope it didn't screw you up too badly. It definitely screwed me up a little bit. We're going to do a show taking a look at some ADPs and some players that I think are a little surprising in high and a little surprising in low, a little mix of hitters and pitchers. But I'm joined by a very special guest today. He is the executive producer for Podcast for the Athletic, which sounds like a lot of work. And you can listen to his dulcet tones on a variety of podcasts that I'll have him promote. Please welcome Derek VanRiper to the show. Derek, first, thank you so much for joining. But I had an important question that I wanted to talk to you first about before we get into it. I wanted to talk to you about slow drafts because I think a lot of us are doing slow drafts right now. A lot of us just finishing up, hopefully just finishing up their TGFBI, a lot of stuff going on. There is a lot of no matter what type of league you're playing in, if you're playing in an expert league with a bunch of fantasy analysts who actually don't know what they're talking about, let's just be honest. We just happen to get paid for it sometimes. Or if you're just playing with some buddies, if you're doing a slow draft, there's going to be some sort of complaining. I want to ask you two questions. Number one, what is the proper etiquette for slow drafts? And number two, are the people who complain about slow drafts more annoying than the people who actually are drafting slow?
Oh, okay. Well, to the first one, I think the etiquette question, I never like being the etiquette police because but it's a fair question.
Yeah.
I think as long as you know you're on the clock, you should pick. It's as simple as that. Do I think you have to drop everything and compulsively check and see if you're on the clock or about to be on the clock every 10 minutes the entire time you're doing a slow draft? No, you don't have to act like me in a slow draft. I get to be me and you get to be you. So my only thing would be if you drop in, regardless of how much time has passed, and then you just don't pick and you leave and then go do other things.
Yes.
I think that is a breach of etiquette. I think that would be the simplest way to look at it. I've complained about slow drafts because I think I am an impatient person. I like to play in auctions or salary cap drafts. I like to play fast. I like to make quick decisions because at the very least, I feel like I don't get worse making fast decisions and other people in the room might make more mistakes. So I can capitalize on that. So I think my nature is to do the exact opposite of a slow draft and play in the fastest paced room possible. So I think I have a little bit of natural tension with the slow draft, but I'm finally getting to the point now. I'm closing in on 40. I'm becoming more patient. I'm realizing we're going to get there. We've got plenty of time. TGFBI starts the first day of March most years. It's going to get done in 9-10 days, sometimes a little less. I draft wrapped on Tuesday. So I guess we were one of the faster ones. And it's kind of my fault we even took that long because I had a pick. I just forgot. I got busy doing other stuff, burned 3 hours of clock on the wheel, which I would never do. Like my average pick time, probably 3-5 minutes or less because I'm in it. I'm in it all the time, but I don't expect people to be that connected all the time.
That's fair. What about that second part of the question, though? Is it more annoying for the people who that do the complaining about it, or is it the people who do take the time on the wheel?
Oh, I think it's almost worse when you're the one complaining about it.
Yeah.
And again, I've been that person. I feel worse complaining than I do actually taking the time.
Yeah. What is worse? Okay, another worse thing for you. The passive-aggressive person who just says, hey, by the way, you're on the clock, or the person who just keeps saying, this takes forever? Which one of those guys is worse?
This takes forever is worse, but again, I think I'm telling on myself because I have kindly reached out to folks to let them know they're on the clock.
Sure.
It really depends on the circumstances, though. Like in the first round in particular, I think everybody's excited just to get started. I'm a little more aggressive about just reaching out to folks and letting them know, like, hey, this started. I forgot about it. Like I genuinely didn't know we were starting today or slipped my mind. So I just want to let you know you're on the clock and I'll leave people alone for the most part to that. Otherwise, if I know someone's under 30 minutes, I'll shoot them a note like, hey, you're getting low on time if you don't want to go on auto. Like that's that's as much as I do.
I think that's fair. I kind of forgot that our TG FBI draft started, and James Anderson, who's in the league with me, sent me a message like after about an hour and said, hey, just so you know, you're on the clock. And I appreciate that type of thing. When it becomes repetitive and they send you a message, like when there's, we have a 4-hour clock for the thing and they send you a message with like 3 hours and 47 minutes, that's a little bit annoying. Also, are you a auto drafter? Do you put in queue, or are you somebody who needs to before you make the pick, just take a look at maybe what the previous picks were and stuff like that? Or are you somebody who, if he knows he's going to be not out of town, but like just not available right when the pick is going to be made, do you set that cue, or do you like to go just make the pick when you're there?
Usually I set the cue now. I think I used to want to be awake or around for everything, but now I think I've developed enough of a feel for the likely outcomes to sort of plan accordingly and be comfortable with whichever route I have to go. I mean, I don't play in any super high stakes slow drafts, so maybe that's part of it too. I mean, TGFBI is an industry league. There's a side pot for people who want to participate in that. But it's not like it's a main event or something where you've got this 4-figure buy-in. I think if that were the case, I'd probably set some kind of alarm or come up with a system to just wake myself up, double check it, look at everything, and then go. Because I guess the other thing about setting a queue that could happen is you could miss some news. That's possible. Yeah. I've heard some people say you should burn most of the clock because a player might sign a contract this time of year and have a job, or you might get some injury news. And I understand the idea behind that, but like that could happen at any random point during the draft. If everybody's going to chew up extra time waiting for something, we're going to be here a lot longer than we need to be.
Well, for everyone who slow drafted Jackson Kowar, I've got bad news for you. It looks like he's going to miss a lot of time. So get that Jackson Kowar replacement for your injury stuff. No, and you're right. You hit the nail on the head that anything can happen at any time. It's one of the reasons I like doing slow drafts is because if that thing does happen, it's a little easier to make that replacement. That, of course, the other argument on the other side is it's a little less likely to make trades before the season if you take too much time to do that thing. But if you're doing a 4-hour draft and you start right around the time that TGFBI did, you should have plenty of time to fix that roster. I just wanted to talk to somebody who's done plenty of these slow drafts to, let you know that the frustration can be real. I understand that it takes some time, but understand that everything is going to be okay as well. All right, so let's talk about some ADP guys. And let's start with Elly De La Cruz, because I'm kind of fascinated to see where Elly De La Cruz is going in drafts. Taking a look at the RotoWire ADP thing, which is something I cannot recommend enough to check out, by the way. RotoWire.com/pod for a free trial to check that out. Gives you a bunch of information from a bunch of different leagues to give you an idea of where players are going. But Elly De La Cruz, on average, is the 4th shortstop off the board, just behind Bobby Witt, Trey Turner, and Corey Seager. And he's going ahead of Seager in a lot of drafts, behind the guys like Francisco Lindor, Gunnar Henderson, Bo Bichette, CJ Abrams, all going after. Is this too early for Elly De La Cruz, Derek?
It feels like the necessary place to take him because he's pretty consistently in that range. Unless you get a room full of like-minded industry folks who are a little more risk averse, he doesn't seem to fall very often. I think if Corey Seager was completely healthy, Seager's ADP would be ahead of Elly De La Cruz's, even though Seager doesn't give you anything in the stolen base category. We've seen what he's accomplished as a hitter. You're getting kind of the Freddie Freeman boost in batting average. The power and run production is phenomenal. You get it with a little bit of extra injury risk, even when he's not actively hurt. But I think that would have flipped if Seager wouldn't have suffered that injury this spring. Elly versus Gunnar seems kind of like an appropriate toss-up. And I think that's kind of the decision people are making, even though there's other players in between. You have a few starting pitchers that go in that range. Once in a while, you'll see the first closer go. I don't think that's necessarily a common sort of thing. Guys like Pete Alonso, there's some power bats that kind of get sprinkled in there as well. But if you're going to take a chance on an inexperienced player, it's one of those two guys. They both have multi-position eligibility in a lot of leagues, being shortstops and third baseman. And in the case of Gunnar, you've got a little bit more track record at the big league level to go off of. Right. I think with De La Cruz, I'm okay with it, but what it does is it just forces you to change your risk tolerance at a lot of other spots. That's all it does. And I think the power speed foundation, even if he does struggle with strikeouts, even if the batting average comes in low this year, the power speed foundation is legit. This is a guy that could be a future 1-1 overall player based on the tools that he has, if it all clicks. I guess the way I'd kind of like spin the question back to you is, do you think the second half struggles of Elly De La Cruz are actually problematic, or are they just normal? They're just a young player seeing big league pitching for the first time, kind of going through the usual adjustment phases, because like a 33% K rate's not horrible in this environment. And the swing decisions weren't bad. A 35% O swing, like that's not unusual. We see guys with 40 plus that hang around and put good seasons together. So, like, what did you make from a kind of a scouting perspective of what was happening to Ellie over the course of the second half?
I think it was a combination of both, but I lean more towards baseball really hard, young player going to struggle, like with some words actually mixed in there to make that an actual sentence. But I do think there are some concerns here. Like those levers are so dang long that I think even the swing decisions being right, he's just going to swing and miss some because you can't really shorten a swing like that. It's the same concern I have with O'Neal Cruz. When you are built more like a stretch forward than a shortstop, you are going to have some swing and miss issues. Overall, though, I think this talent is so special. And the fact that I think he did make some adjustments based on my eye, like did a better job of recognizing pitches towards the end of the year, recognizing spin. Yeah, the swing and miss is going to be problematic forever. But I think that the power speed combination here has a chance to be super special. And the average, when you can run like him, you're going to beat out a lot of ground balls. You can have a chance to hit in that 260, 270 range, even if you are striking out a lot. I will say, though, 26.58 is the average ADP when you average out Underdog, NFBC, Fantrax, and NFBC. That's too high for me, knowing that I can get an O'Neal Cruz 3 rounds later. I can get an Anthony Volpe 100 picks later. And I'm not saying that Anthony Volpe has the same type of upside as Elly De La Cruz, but it's not that dissimilar. This is still a 21-year-old who has an impressive power speed combination, plays in a pretty darn good lineup, a chance if he's hitting in the bottom of the order to be driven in by a lot of really good players. And then you got players like Nico Horner and CJ Abrams that I think still have a ton of offensive upside. Taking him right around the end of the second round or the top of the third round just seems so aggressive. And I'm glad you brought up Gunnar Henderson too. Because I got asked a few different times about which one should I keep, Gunnar Henderson or Elly De La Cruz. You'd agree that Gunnar Henderson has the higher floor here, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen him make the adjustments. We've seen him get the strikeout rate to a normal level. 25% is fine. He draws his walks. He's already making a ton of hard contact. This is a guy that's got a 52% hard hit rate for his career in nearly 200 big league games. So it's working for Gunnar Henderson, and they were patient with him. And I think the bigger part of the question with Elly De La Cruz is like, what's the actual downside? I know there were the rumblings on Twitter probably 2 months ago now. Well, maybe Elly gets sent down. A lot's changed since then. We got the Noelvi Marte suspension.
Yeah.
So you remove one guy that could have played a ton from the playing time mix for the first half of the season. That takes a little pressure off of Elly, even though it also opens up a lot of playing time for, like if Jeimer Candelario wasn't a max volume player before, he probably is now. If CES wasn't, he probably creeps up a little bit too, just because that's the way it is now. Like there's one fewer guy that was going to have a large share. I just think I'm having a hard time at this point believing that the Reds would send Elly De La Cruz down to AAA. He'd have to be really, really bad. I think he's a good enough defender where that kind of keeps him afloat. Maybe he gets demoted, plays in the bottom third of the order for stretches. He's not hitting enough, but I don't think he's going to be so bad that he gets sent down. I think that's a little bit of an overblown fear. So, ultimately, I think it's just sort of like a fair price relative to crazy high ceiling, but it's hard for me to take him there, even though I love the player, because of other players that I tend to go after a little bit later on, also having risky profiles, but being cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. Since you brought up Marte, with him missing these 80 games, is he draftable in redraft leagues, or is he someone that because most leagues do not have the ability even with the SUSP designation not to put them in the injured list, but is he someone worth hanging on to, like with a 24th or 25th round pick, or are you looking elsewhere?
It's so hard to play short because you're going to be doing this until July. Like that's not the way I like to build rosters, because I'm going to have other guys that get hurt that I need to keep that are probably early round picks. Like inevitably, you might lose a pitcher for 3 or 4 weeks. You're going to have to keep that player on the bench, and suddenly you're playing with a 5-man bench because you chose to draft somebody that you were trying to kind of hold for that long. So unless you have that designated NA spot for a suspended player, I don't think you really want to waste that spot, even though the payoff could be there eventually. I think it's going to hurt you a lot more than it helps you in the long run.
DVR, imagine me telling you at this point last year that Nolan Jones would be drafted higher than Mike Trout in a lot of leagues, or drafted higher than Randy Arozarena, or drafted higher than players like Cody Bellinger and Brian Reynolds and Josh Lowe. Right now, it's right around a 50th pick for Nolan Jones. And I'm a big fan. I think that the fact that he gets to play in Baseball Utopia also is something that you have to add in here. Is that too high for Nolan Jones, though? Averaging about the 15th outfielder. Too high, too low, just about right?
This actually seems about right. And I think it's interesting. Jeff and I were talking about it a couple days ago. Like, if you go pocket aces and you sort of put yourself on this track where you're looking at hitters when everybody else is looking at pitchers,
Sure.
Nolan Jones is a player you have to make a more firm decision on. If you just go hitter pitcher, have a more common build, you can pretty easily sidestep the question. But you could look at Nolan Jones and kind of talk yourself into him as maybe a guy that's going to move up in ADP going into next season if the strikeout rate, which got better over the course of the year,
right,
if that levels off anywhere close to what he was doing near the end of the season, then the batting average floor stays up nice and high. The park protects that a little bit anyway. The power speed combo, that looks like legit 30-30 tools to me.
Yep.
And I think the thing that I was really surprised by back when the Rockies acquired Nolan Jones was the speed. It was there. It was right there on the Baseball Savant page. You could see the sprint speed. The slider was in the red. It was exactly where you would want it to be. I can't understand why the Guardians wanted to trade Nolan Jones. It baffles me. I know they love middle infielders. They do well in trades for middle infielders, but their constant need for an outfielder with power, it just blows my mind that they did this. So I actually think this is probably just right. If Nolan Jones didn't get to play half his games in Colorado, I think there was enough batting average risk where it might be a little bit too early, but I think that hides one of his biggest flaws, and he started to show a lot of improvement. Plus, he was better against lefties than I think people realize. I don't think they're going to have to sit him against lefties.
Yeah.
They shouldn't, based on what was happening last year, and they shouldn't based on who they are. Like, let the guy try and figure it out. He's one of the few really good players you have on the big league roster right now.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out, too, that Nolan Jones was really good on the road as well. So this was not just a guy who, like, 1.1 OPS at home and just held on the road. No, he was really good. Like, Nolan Jones is a really good baseball player. And I think from the scouting perspective, I think the biggest thing here is that he figured out assertive. He figured out that because this was a guy who drew close to 100 walks in the minor leagues every year, but was hitting 230, 240, drawing a nice on-base percentage. But the big thing was that he wasn't tapping into the power. And this was stuff like Keith Law and I talked about it when he was a prospect. We knew that there was raw pop in this guy's bat. He's figured that out. He's figured out that assertiveness. I actually think he's going too low, to be honest with you. I think he's a 4th-round pick. I think he deserves to be in that 40 to 48 range. Am I taking him over Michael Harris, Adolis Garcia, Luis Robert? No, I'm not doing that. But I think he does deserve to go over the Kyle Schwarbers. I think him and Schwarber are an interesting comparison, actually, because, Schwarber's going to help you in one category for sure. He's going to give you those homers, but he's going to hurt you in a lot of others. Let's say, you're drafting on the button, 4th round, or top of the 5th. Nolan Jones or Kyle Schwarber, which one are you taking?
Easy call for me with Jones. I think the categorical balance, the park, even though, I love the Phillies lineup, and I think that helps the counting stats for Kyle Schwarber. I'd much rather have Jones. I mean, there's a chance that he's very good in batting average again, which is just huge. I think that's the category that I'm looking more power and average early with my bats because there's an abundance of steals in the player pool. I can get those bags, those 20 and 25 steal guys in the middle rounds. As long as I don't go too light in that range, I'll end up with enough speed. I don't necessarily have to get 30 plus from every one of my early picks. But Nolan Jones versus Schwarber is a clear Nolan Jones call for me.
I agree as well. I will say, though, that just don't be surprised if Kyle Schwarber hits 50 homers and drives in 150 runs. I mean, that is absolutely possible with that power. Just be prepared to take a hit elsewhere. Real quick, too, Nolan Jones is going in underdog leagues at 34.3. In best ball leagues, that's way too low because there's a good chance for combo meals with Nolan Jones. I would absolutely be looking at him. Middle of the 2nd round, top of the 3rd should be going much higher than that. We're going to take a look at some more hitters and then also move into pitchers, but we're going to take a very quick commercial break. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Are you coming from another service? Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Great for those dynasty drafts. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. They've got waivers, categories, scoring systems, schedule, and more. They offer all the custom solutions, and the best part of all that, put your wallet away. It's free. And if you sign up for free today, you have a chance to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. You simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's FANTRAX.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, Jake Burger, who I think Jake Burger was supremely underrated for the second half of the season that he had. I'm not expecting those kind of numbers, but I'm a little bit surprised to see where he's going in drafts. He is on average the 12th third baseman off the board, going just behind players like Max Muncy and Alec Boehm, right around the same price of Isaac Paredes and Junior Caminero. I feel like Jake Burger's going too low, DVR. Do you agree?
I think he might be more of a just right for me, in part because of some things that are out of his control. I think that Marlins lineup around him is bad. I think compared to other guys that are going to hit for as much power as Burger offers, you're going to get fewer RBIs and fewer runs from him.
Good point.
I think the question I've come back to with Burger, one of our listeners brought this up in our Discord, was just that the K rate got a lot better with the Marlins. And I started to think more about Burger as a player and just say, okay, wait a minute. Like, he missed a lot of time. Like, everybody lost the 2020 season in the minor leagues, but he had multiple shoulder injuries, if I remember correctly, like big shoulder injuries.
Multiple ACL or Achilles injuries.
Yeah. So he had two very serious injuries that cost him a ton of development time. So you can look at him and say, well, maybe he's a finished product. He's going to be 28 in April. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think when you lose basically 3 years of development time, your actual age and your baseball age get a little bit out of whack. And I think that's what's happening here. So I think the question is like, okay, is there a reason to believe that Jake Burger can maintain a 25 or 26% K rate? Projections have him 26, 27%. Generally, projections are a good guide for something like this when our brains might be prone to latching on to the most recent thing that happened and saying, this is his new skill level. This is what he brings. I think this is a totally fair price. I find myself not getting Jake Burger. I think it's because usually in that point in the draft, I'm looking at something else. That whole pocket, it's Burger, Alec Boehm, Brian Hayes, Max Muncy. I stay away from that group mostly because I'm doing something different. And the other reason is I see a couple of guys that go a little later than those guys, like Paredes, Candelario, Ryan McMahon, even as kind of a last chance saloon player who's just going to play a ton. I see them as being close enough in value where I want to go somewhere else. A lot of times I'll find I need a middle infielder. So either Volpe fell or Trevor Story's still there. And I'm looking for guys that run in that range. So it's just sort of like a player type I've needed for my builds. That's kept me away from Burger probably more than anything about Jake Burger himself.
The strikeout thing is interesting too, because like the whiff rate, the 26 to 27%, that would be really nice to see. He's going to have to stop chasing so much. Like 38.5% was his chase rate last year. That's really bad. And he doesn't draw a ton of walks. You are pretty much relying on that power. I think the lineup thing is a good point. I maybe like the Marlins lineup a little bit more than you. At least maybe I just want them to be better because they're a kind of a fun little group. By the way, I so wish we could have gotten a Tim Anderson, Jazz Chisholm double play combination. That would be the swaggiest double play combination of all time. How fun would that have been? But there are some talented guys in that Miami group, a lot of unproven guys who haven't shown that they can do it on a consistent basis. It's interesting that the Alec Boehm thing, I've been an Alec Boehm fan for so long and, did have a pretty solid season last year for a much better line, like a much better chance, I think, for helping the RBI category. The Junior Caminero situation is interesting for me because Isaac Paredes and Junior Caminero are 13th and 14th here. I think that, would you consider pairing Paredes with Caminero? Like if you could get Caminero a little bit later as some safety stuff, or do you have to pick one of those guys and then hope that he ends up being that dude?
I think you could actually roster both because I think there's a world in which they both play in the lineup together. I don't think it's just an A-B sort of choice at third base because if they need Junior Caminero's bat, and I think they will in that lineup, They could play Paredes at first. They could give Yandy Diaz some days at DH. They could use Paredes as a DH. It just moves someone like Jonathan Aranda to the bench potentially, right? It's like, well, he's done what he's done at AAA for a couple of years, and they still haven't given him a prolonged opportunity yet. So that's probably where the weakness is, rather than with Paredes himself. I think what Paredes does, like pulling the ball in the air and just taking advantage of pitches he can drive, that's a skill. Until teams pitch him differently, he's going to keep doing that. And we've seen guys, I think, pointed out that was the Brian Dozier trick for a long time. Extreme pull approach. Sometimes it hurts you in batting average. I think the question would be like, well, Paredes might have a better hit tool than Brian Dozier did. So he might be a little less vulnerable to low batting average as a result. And he might be able to do some stuff that's interesting when he's pitched differently. I think that's a possible outcome with Paredes that people really aren't sure about right now. So I think you could draft both of them. I don't have Campusano anywhere yet. I think I've drafted 7 or 8 teams, and I'm 0 for the draft season so far on him. And the more you look at that lineup, the more you can see they clearly need to find a way to replace Wander with a bat that is an impact bat that they can trust every day, because they like the platoon at so many other places. And I think Campusano could be that guy. I just don't know how long we have to wait before they're going to give him that call again.
Yeah, me too. That's going to be a really interesting situation. I will say with Campusano, I talk about this a lot. FOMO. I would have so much fear of missing out, even if he isn't guaranteed to be on the roster to begin the year, even if, hey, could see him in early May or something like that, or later. I'd much rather have him knowing that when he gets that call up, if you don't have him, either somebody else has got him or you're going to have to spend like half of your fab to get him. So yeah, the fear of missing out with him is legit. I had fear of missing out on this guy, DVR, even though apparently I shouldn't have. Edouard Julien, who is on average going 200th in drafts, the 15th second baseman off the board. I'll just spoil my take. I am a huge Julien fan. Is this too low for him?
It seems a little low. The depth at second base, I think, works against him a little bit, because there's a few other guys similar to what I was talking about with those late kind of pick 200 options at third. You could say, yeah, this guy will be okay if I miss out. I think what changed, though, is that they made that deal with the Mariners. Like, getting rid of Jorge Polanco opened some things up for Julien's floor to increase. Maybe he's a big side platoon guy, but he's so good against righties, and I don't know if he avoids lefties completely. I think he can find a way. So I guess the only question is, like, does he have a true defensive position? Like, do you like him at second base? Do the Twins like him enough at second base? Does he lose some late inning plate appearances because of his glove? This is a guy that hit 274 with a 401 OBP and a 497 slug against righties last year. And I don't think he's a true talent 30+% K rate guy.
Right.
I wonder if he's more of a little too passive, works the count a little bit too long. You see it in the walk rate. If he becomes more aggressive, that would probably benefit him in the long run.
So I'm going to give you some names, and I'll just have you give me an answer of which guy you'd rather have for 2024. Thairo Estrada or Edouard Julien?
Estrada, but that's close.
Luis Arias or Julien?
Probably Arias.
Tommy Edman or Julien?
With Edman's injury, I'd take Julien.
Nolan Gorman or Julien?
Ooh, that's tough, because that's another probably more of a platoon guy, at least based on how you look at it right now. I think I trust Gorman just a little bit more, but that's very close.
And then Brandon Drury or Julien?
Julien.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see a lot of those guys are either going substantially higher than Julien or going very close to after, and a few a little bit later. Like, and second base is pretty deep. Like, the fact that you can get Jonathan India, who I realize is a very flawed real life player, as late as you can, is pretty interesting to me. Gavin Lux, who permanent for now, is going to be something that is stuck in my head forever. Late with Merrifield, who I think is actually kind of a little bit of a sleeper this year, just because of the fact that he's going so late and signed so late. But I'm a big Julien fan. The plate skills are so good. On base percentage leagues, I think you have to give him a major jump up, because his approach is really impressive. Long term, I am concerned, because he's not a good defensive player, and I have no idea what exactly he's going to be. Because if he's a designated hitter, like if he's strictly util, I'm pretty worried about him in the long term. But for now, he's at that second base position, and Here's another one for you because I've had a lot of debates with this guy. Where are you on Zach Geloff?
He seems to be undervalued to the point where, like, when I look at the skills, I don't think the skills difference from Geloff to McClain is actually as large as the ADP gap is. And park and lineup and those factors are part of the difference. But I think with Geloff, if you look back at his minor league production too, he had a shoulder injury that slowed him down.
Yep.
And I think if we had seen a more healthy version of him, I think that was in 2022 at AA, those numbers might have been more impressive. The swing and miss looks like that's pretty steadily like part of his profile. He's done that kind of everywhere he's played, but he walks enough to offset that, kind of keeps the real life value afloat. Probably was a better runner than people realized. I think last year was proof of that. We saw it both at AAA and in the big leagues. So I like Geloff. He's been falling in enough rooms where I've got him a couple places, and he's sort of become a target for me just because the room doesn't seem to be as enthused about him as they probably should be.
Yeah, the fact that he plays for a AA baseball team is something that does concern me a little bit, but I think the power speed combination is legit. I would have some concerns about the average, I think he's more of a true 250, 255 hitter than somebody who's going to hit 270, 280, but that can certainly play. And if you're looking for a second baseman who can give you 20 homers and 25 stolen bases, I think you can do a lot worse. Closing up the hitters with Luis Campusano. Campusano was really good in admittedly a small sample size. Doesn't seem like people are buying in too much. He's on average the 17th catcher off the board. Let me just ask you this, DVR. If you end up with Luis Campusano as your catcher one in a 12-team league, do you feel okay about it, or would you prefer some other guys?
Do we have to start two catchers in this league?
There's only one catcher because two catcher leagues are monsters, and I will do everything in my power to make sure TGFBI is not two catchers next year.
Okay. Well, as a single catcher option, he's kind of borderline, but I think that's sort of where everything becomes an unknown. Like when I look at the catcher list right now, I see 10 guys that are pretty clearly like catcher ones based on role and skills.
Fair.
And by ADP, that line is where Francisco Alvarez is. He's the 10th, at least in the NFBC, he's the 10th catcher being drafted. When you look at Gabriel Moreno, who looked great in the postseason last year and should play a ton. Sure. Logan O'Hoppe, who was really good around that major injury last year. Jonah Heim, Bo Naylor, Keibert Ruiz, Mitch Garver now basically a DH. Maybe occasionally he'll catch when Raleigh needs a day off. And then Campusano. Like you could argue any of those guys for those next couple of spots behind the likes of Wilson Contreras and Sean Murphy and Francisco Alvarez. So, I mean, I think you probably did really well at every other roster spot if you waited. And it's a tough game to decide which of those guys is actually going to pop and be the most valuable, because there's reasons to like just about everybody that I just listed off there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think catcher, I give it a hard time, is a little bit deeper than it's been for a while. Like you take a look at guys like Ryan Jeffers and Alejandro Kirk could be a bounce back candidate. Tyler Stevenson could be a little bit of a bounce back candidate on top of the names that you mentioned. It's why I'm waiting on catcher unless I can get Big Dumper in that like 150 range. And that's partially because I can't take away a little bit of my Mariner bias. I just love the guy so much. And I do believe that Big Dumper will be a top 3 fantasy catcher this year, which is an aggressive thing when you got Adley Rutschman, Will Smith, William Contreras, and some other guys. But I am just such a believer in that guy's power. And I think the average is actually going to see a little bit of a tick up there as well. But I like Campusano, and it's kind of, the thing about young catchers, man, it's such a hard position. And for every Adley Rutschman, we see a lot more of these guys who struggle at the first taste of the major league action and then figure some stuff out. I mean, this was a legitimate top 30 prospect in baseball at one point who really looked like the part, especially to end the year in a season that was full of disappointments for the Padres. Campusano was something that stood out to me. If you're one of those guys who likes to wait till the very end and you have a name like Campusano, I think you're actually going to be doing okay, knowing that there are, if he doesn't live up to hype, there are some options that you can probably pick up later in the year. All right, let's move over to pitchers. And I want to talk about Cole Ragans, because Cole Ragans is a guy that me and Ryan Boyer have waxed poetically about for a very long time. But it doesn't sound like fantasy managers have totally bought into Cole Ragans and the top of the rotation experience. Where do you stand with him?
price keeps going up,
Yeah.
I'd love it. I mean, I think when you see the 99s, the 100s, the 101s in spring training, right? He's
Sure.
lighting up the radar gun. Arm seems like it's feeling really, really good. The ratios were excellent last year once he got that opportunity. The strikeout rate is that of an SP1. Like he shows those kinds of skills. I think what's holding some people back and maybe held me back to this point is just that lack of a track record.
Yeah.
There's plenty of pedigree here. This is a former first round pick. Like,
Yep.
guy the Rangers took 30th overall back in 2016, and it's been a little bit of a meandering road for him, but he's holding the velo. The secondaries look legit. I guess the only skills question would be the walk rate.
Right.
Maybe like is that a long-term concern, or is that just he's so filthy and has this arsenal that's now better than what he started with? Like he's just kind of still figuring out how to utilize it.
Right. So the thing with Ragans for me is I don't think this was a guy who had such a weird delivery that like he can't figure out the strike zone. I think he's more of a guy similar to Matt Brash, where it's just there's so much movement on these pitches that it's difficult to command it on a consistent basis. I think so. He's the 34th pitcher off the board on average. He's right around the 100th pick. 98.23 is what he averages when you combine the leagues. I would want to take somebody who's going to have a pretty like guaranteeing a low whip is difficult, although we'll talk about a guy who we might be able to guarantee a low whip for. I would want to take one of those guys to balance things out because there are going to be some clunkers, I think, for Cole Ragans. I think you'll see some 3 1/3 innings, 5-run, 5-walk starts that'll frustrate you a little bit. But the bitter is going to be mixed out with a lot of better. Like his stuff is so freaking good. Anybody who watched Cole Ragans pitch at the end of last year, the eye test has to matter a little bit, guys. The eye test has to tell. I love these metrics. They're very important. You have to balance them. But if you watched Cole Ragans pitch, there's no way you can tell me that he's the 34th best pitcher in fantasy leagues. Like he should be going considerably higher in my estimation. Would you agree though that maybe you need to balance it out with some safety there too?
Yep, it comes down to the type of staff you're building. I mean, I think building any sort of roster is like building a retirement portfolio. Like you want some risk, you want some stability.
Yeah.
You need the same kind of thing up and down your roster. I think if you are someone like me who chases Tyler Glass now as your ace on a regular basis,
Sure.
you might not pair him with Cole Ragans as your SP2. Like that's my brain says, okay, be a little less risky with your SP2 and your 3 because you like Glass now so much. But guess what? Glass now's not on every one of my teams. So there's always the possibility that I went a little safer with that first pitcher and Ragans is sitting there in a pocket where I'm really comfortable. I've been all over the hitters in this range, but it's a really fun group of pitchers to pick from. This is just where if you zig when everyone else zags, these are the fun pitchers that everyone else is getting while you're kind of getting your oatmeal-y hitters. You know, you're getting your Paul Goldschmidts, your Nolan Arenados, your Alex Bregmans, and that's a totally fine way to play. But like the FOMO, if you're a person that has FOMO with pitching, that's the cost of going the route of drafting your pitching a little early, is missing out on these young future aces or current aces that are maybe not being treated as such. And one other thing on Ragans that's kind of interesting is if you look back at his time in the Rangers system, he only had a few like real hiccups. Like in 2021, got to AA for the first time. Okay, the ratios weren't good. Happens all the time. That jump to AA is tough. He comes back the next year, pitches well at AA, pitches well at AAA, gets to debut, isn't as good in his debut as he was in the minors. Normal, not a big deal. Goes back down to AAA last year, pitches really well for the Rangers before that trade, and then gets the call with the Royals and is excellent. So the track record's actually a lot better than people realize when you start to kind of put it into context and kind of look back at what happened. And plus, it's a guy that didn't pitch in games for a few years because of injuries again, right? 18, 19, and then the lost season in 20. Like there's just a huge gap in his resume. So sure, he's 26 already, but he's like 23 or 24 in terms of actual pitcher age.
Yeah, that's a great point. And by the way, I also think for people who are concerned about the win stuff, I actually think the Royals might be pretty good. I am a big believer in that roster, like, and in, balance schedule and stuff like that. But I think the fact that they're going to be competitive through that AL Central because it's 10 pounds of in a 5-pound bag is something that I think can play into their factor. Speaking of oatmeal, George Kirby. So George Kirby is the 9th pitcher off the board, which as a Mariner prospect guy, I've loved George Kirby for a long time. Never thought he would quite reach this level. He's average draft pick is 41.46. Is George Kirby a fantasy ace?
Yeah, I think he is. I think it's whip first and maybe ERA slightly behind that, but you're not getting a
Sure.
bad ERA. You're getting a guy who's really efficient because the control is outstanding. I
So
think what
good.
you lose in strikeout rate, you can pretty easily make up in just volume because he's going to be pitching so deep into games. It gives him a higher chance of getting a win. I think everyone likes the Mariners bullpen as a unit to protect leads. I think the offense is still probably a top 10 group of hitters collectively again. So the team context is good. The park factors are good. The skills are good. He's also one of those guys, and plenty of major league pitchers are just ridiculous as a group in general. But within that group, Kirby is kind of at the extreme end of most ridiculous in terms of things he can do, like tinkering around with the knuckleball and just like he just has an amazing feel for pitching. And I
Yeah.
think that makes his floor unbelievably high. And the stuff seems like it just keeps getting better and better. If you told me he's going to get to a strikeout per inning again this year, I wouldn't push back on that. That wouldn't be that surprising, but he should be among the league leaders in whip, and he should do it for a heavy, heavy volume of innings, which carries a ton of value.
I mean, his command is just stupid good. He throws everything for strikes and not just strikes. It's not a guy who's just filling the strike zone. He hits his spots with everything. All right, let's play the would you rather game here again. Kirby or Luis Castillo?
Wow, I like them both.
Yeah.
Can I double tap if I'm at 2 and 3? Can I just get my pocket aces both from the same rotation? I've got Castillo one spot ahead of Kirby.
Nice.
Probably because I'm always chasing the K's, but that's a really tough toss up.
Pablo Lopez or George Kirby?
Oh, I'm Kirby. I think Pablo Lopez is a great story.
Mm-hmm.
I am still a little cautious about his health history relative to the market. So I don't have him buried or anything, but I just think there's always a few people in the room that like Pablo Lopez more than me. But for me, there's actually a pretty sizable gap between Kirby and Lopez right now.
How about Zach Gallen and George Kirby?
Kirby.
Yeah, I agree. And then one really weird one, but not weird, but Tariq Skubal or George Kirby?
I'm Kirby as well. I think even the recent injury stuff that Scubal's gone through is legit. I mean, I'll take injury risk pitchers at various points. And I think the further removed you are from a serious injury, the more likely I am to buy in. That's where I'm in on Glass now as a top 5 starter. Scubal needs that one more full season for me before I'm ready to fully buy in. I think the skills are great. I'm just worried that it'll break down again. I actually see Scubal kind of as a toss-up for Blake Snell. I'm assuming Snell's going to get a job and pitch somewhere this year. Just in terms of their innings risk being similar, but their skills also being elite or borderline elite.
And then one more, Kirby or Yamamoto?
So I've got Yamamoto ahead right now. I think the hard thing about ranking a player that we haven't seen a lot of, or at least that I haven't seen a lot of, is that you can be influenced by spring innings more than you probably ought to be. But I think just based on Eno Saris did a really nice breakdown of Yamamoto's stuff from the WBC, and basically said it's Kevin Gossman's arsenal with a better third pitch. I'm like, okay, well, Gossman is here, and this is a guy who's on probably the best team in the league, and the skills are off the charts good. So let's slot him in right there. So I've got Yamamoto just a notch ahead of Kirby and Castillo, but that's one of my rankings that I'm just like, I'm really not as confident in it as I'd like to be.
Yeah, that's fair. I am all in on Yamamoto. I'm just the reports I got, the stuff that I've watched in Japan, the stuff I've seen in spring training. I'm a big fan. Please do not ever say a nice thing about Eno Saris on this show ever again. Let's do some closers. This one's interesting to me, obviously, because I'm talking to you about it. Camilo Duvall, who I think I'm a little more excited about Duvall now that the Giants have made some moves, and I think they're going to add at least one more piece to this roster. I am interested to see that he's going as high in drafts as he is. Do you have concerns about Duvall for 2024?
I don't actually. I think they've really settled into using him more like a traditional closer. I mean, he does lose command occasionally, not atypical of young closers that have phenomenal stuff, but he seems like he's really calm in even like the most dire situations on the mound. I love that about him when I watch him. We've seen it kind of consistently now for 2 years. K rate kind of right around 30%. Walk rate's not out of control bad. We see worse from other closers in this range. So I think he's actually appropriately priced. They pushed him pretty hard again last year. think 67 and 2/3 innings each of the last 2 seasons, but sub 3 ERAs and improving whip, and probably a team that I'm with you is actually going to get a little better because you already went out and signed Matt Chapman. And if you go out and get Blake Snell, the pick you give up relative to signing a player like that, if you hadn't signed Chapman, it's not that big of a deal. So stack them, like just go for it. Just keep pushing chips in because you need to be more than a mid-back team in that market. And I think Blake Snell would be a huge difference maker for them.
So you're okay with Duvall being your closer 1, or would you prefer maybe him being your RP2?
I don't want to squeeze 2 in quite that early because I think I'm a little bit light in too many other categories the way the board works this year. So I'd be fine with him as a 1. I like Raisel Iglesias more than some people do. I think I like Jordan Romano about the same as Doval, but he belongs in that tier. I think it's an appropriate price. And the way closer runs happen, like if there's a gap of 10 or 15 picks in ADP, I don't necessarily trust that on draft day. Like you can kind of squeeze those players closer together. Like once you see a few guys who are close come off the board, you know that someone's likely to jump those players 10 or 15 spots if they have to.
Fair. While I have you here, Andre Munoz, are you believing in him as a closer 1, or do you think he is more of that closer 2 range?
I think he's more of a closer 2 because of health concerns, but I think he fits really nicely into the group with Ryan Helsley, Pete Fairbanks, guys that are just nasty, that if they take the job and stay healthy with the job, there's no reason why they can't be closer 1s. So what happens is if I end up shopping in that bin, I try to get 2 out of that group. That's where I'm saying, okay, I don't want to wait too long. I don't want to get caught trying to play the closer committee games later on, trying to figure out what's going on in Philly or San Diego. I want the guys that I think are clearly the best reliever in their respective bullpens who should be the guys, even though they have that negative health grade sitting next to them. So that's the one thing that's holding Munoz back right now. I mean, seeing how they handled Seawald for years, even if Munoz isn't the guy every single time, I get the sense that he'd be the guy for 80+% of the save opportunities, and the Mariners should have plenty of them.
Yeah, I think so as well, in part because I think they're going to play some close games. I'm a little more excited about Munoz because of something that makes me not excited as a Mariner fan. The injury concerns to Matt Brash and Gregory Santos are legitimate. And I think the fact that they don't have, like, they would love to have Munoz be that guy who is the perfect high leverage situation guy. They would love to have him as that guy who, that if the 3, 4, 5 are coming up in the 8th inning, then hey, we have Matt Brash, we have Gregory Santos, they can take care of the 9th inning. Doesn't sound like those guys are going to be available for a little bit. And the fact that I think that he's the overwhelming majority of save chances early on for a pretty good team, not a great team, but a pretty good team, I think puts him closer to that RP7, RP6 for me, because that guy's stuff is just, if it's not the best in baseball, it's competing with it. And you could argue that Matt Brash actually has better stuff, but he has just no idea where it's going too often for me to put him in that range. I think that makes him a little bit more excited. Let's end with another closer. Evan Phillips is being drafted 170th on average when you take everything combined. 62nd pitcher off the board. Derek, I think that's way too late. Would you agree with me?
Yeah, he's the guy right now. I mean, we've seen enough of Brusdar Gratterall in that bullpen and how they use him to realize that he's not the closer.
Right.
He might look like a closer.
Sure.
He's not their closer. Phillips had 24 saves last year. The ratios have been phenomenal for these last 2 seasons. I mean, this is a guy that could actually finish as closer 1 if he gets 90% of the save chances for this team. That is in the range of possibilities, and he can do it without having the gaudy strikeout rates of some of the guys that are ranked ahead of him. So I think that's part of the reason why people are cautious. That and maybe the possibility of the Dodgers going out and getting Kenley Jansen back again. Like,
sure,
if Kenley Jansen can get traded to Philly or some other team that needs a capital C closer, and I don't think Philly actually needs one, they just seem to always add more when you don't expect them to. If that were to happen, that would probably ease some of the concerns about Phillips, and maybe his ADP would creep up a bit. That one sounds like it really depends on which site you're playing on, because he might be buried in some of the pre-ranks. And I think one thing I've learned over the years is what draft rooms do for pre-ranks has a surprising amount of influence on where players go.
Sure. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. I would say that the other concern I have with Phillips a little bit, that 2.05 ERA, I think might be in for some regression. Like, I think maybe you could see him be as good of pitcher as he was last year, but see a little bit higher ERA. But the fact that this guy's going to get the save chances for the very best team in baseball, like I'd much rather have that guy on my roster than a few of the other closing options. It is interesting, though, that you bring up a reunion with Jansen. I think that if the Guardians are very good, Emmanuel Clase makes an awful lot of sense as a potential addition for that team. How many closers do you usually roster, Derek?
Probably 3. My hope is that the first 2 are just clearly closers, and I'm not even worrying about job security. If they get hurt, they get hurt. That's just part of the game.
Right.
And the third one is more of that committee sort of dart, where I'm guessing late. If I don't like what I see, it's an easy player to drop. If I need to just go with 7 starters and 2 relievers, I'm totally comfortable doing that. But I think early in the season is one of the best times to try and fish in that pool of uncertainty and find someone that could at least be a partial closer. Because if you have 2 plus a half closer, you're probably going to be near the top of the standings in your league in saves. And you can always flip that switch later. You don't have to roster 3 all season long. You can roster 3 until you only have 2 available.
Right.
Drop that extra player that lost the job or got hurt if there's uncertainty, and then you're good the rest of the way. Like, you banked the saves you needed. Now you can sort of make up some ground on the starting pitching side.
Yeah, I think that 2 or 3 is right around the number that I like to have. I like to be aggressive on the waiver wire with that type of thing, knowing that, things will change. Players will get opportunities that you don't necessarily expect. And the worst thing that happens is you end up dropping the guys if they don't end up taking a regular closer job. But it is nice to have those 2 guaranteed, quote unquote, to have in your bullpen. Derek, thank you so much for doing this. Please promote all the good stuff that you have going on.
Yeah, mostly just Rates and Barrels. My co-host Voldemort and I do 4 episodes a week. We've got a live stream with Trevor May. Hopefully I can say his name on this pod. He joins us every Friday.
Yeah.
Trevor's awesome. He's on at 1:00 Eastern. We go live on our YouTube channel, but 4 episodes a week. Everything is everywhere now. I do a little bit of writing for the Draft Kit at The Athletic as well. So if you don't have a subscription, theathletic.com/rates and barrels always gives you the best offer we have going. So be sure to check that out. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am more of a reader than a poster these days. And even that, I hang out more in our Discord, but I'm at Derek VanRiper on Twitter. And the Discord is where I like to spend more of my time now because people generally are in a better mood there.
Yeah, they definitely would be. I watched that video of Trevor May reacting to Matt Brash's slider 47 times a week, give or take. It's just so good. He's going to be an absolute star in this industry, and I appreciate his honesty about that AA baseball team that we were talking about not long ago. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for those of you who are watching on YouTube. We'd really appreciate you hitting like and subscribe on all the appropriate channels. You can follow me on that website at Crawford_MILB. New episodes every single day of the week throughout the season. Really appreciate your support, and we will talk to you next time.